You're listening to an Airwave Media Podcast.
Expedia and Visit Scotland invite you to come step into centuries of history that await in Scotland. Castles steeped in legend walk along cobblestone streets. Come share the warmth of stories passed down through generations. This is a place with a past that is fully present today and all yours to explore. Plan your Scottish escape today at expedia.com/Visit Scotland.
The recent crewed NASA flyby of the moon was historic in a number of very important regards. First, it was the first spaceflight beyond low Earth orbit undertaken by actual human beings in more than 50 years. Second, the diversity of its crew represents multiple important firsts. Its pilot, Victor Glover Jr., is the first person of color to travel to the moon and back. Mission specialist Christina Cook is the first woman to travel not only within the vicinity of the moon, but even beyond low Earth orbit. And Canadian Jeremy Hansen is the first non-US citizen to make such a trip. Moreover, their journey, which took them 252,756 miles from Earth, broke Apollo 13's 1970 record, making them the human beings who have traveled farthest from Earth. Because of the path they took and the cameras with which they were equipped, they were able to capture higher resolution imagery of the lunar far side than any previous probe or crewed mission to the moon. And some of that imagery is truly spectacular. Indeed, some of it is actually too good to be true. AI-generated imagery of incredibly close-up views of the lunar surface have been circulating on social media. While Artemis II has captured fantastic imagery, it hasn't looked like these images, which make it seem like the surface of the moon was just outside their window, stretching away to the horizon. Even at its closest, Artemis II was still 4,000 miles from the lunar surface. Along with such fake imagery came false reports that Artemis II astronauts had detected strange moving objects on the lunar surface. This is unsurprising. In my last episode, I indicated that conspiracy theorists would expect such encounters and that they wouldn't actually occur. What was also predictable, especially in an online environment saturated with conspiracist claims and AI slop, is that moon mission denialists would rear their stupid heads again. And sure enough, during the Artemis II mission and ever since, false claims that the whole mission was fake have been circulating, with dumb puns like astronaut in OT. Posts circulating on social media have variously claimed that the images provided by NASA have been doctored and that footage of the crew in zero gravity was either AI-generated or faked on a sound stage. Some of these claims are very easily refuted. For example, more than one popular post featured social media users with no expertise in the topic, thinking they had a real gotcha point by displaying the Artemis II images of Earth and asking why no satellites could be seen. There are upward of 15,000 satellites orbiting Earth, it's true, but the photos Artemis II took of Earth were captured some 40,000 miles away. One might as well ask why you can't see all the cars and all the people on the surface. The question just reveals ignorance. Then we had some eagle-eyed folks who noticed that during a live interview with the astronauts by CNN, in which a plush toy can be seen floating in zero gravity, an overlay of text could be seen momentarily through the toy, indicating some sort of transparency or visual effect. This was easily explained as an artifact of an overlay that had been added to the feed by a news station. The original live feed reveals no text overlay. And finally, we have some genuine evidence that AI was used to fake images of the Artemis crew. But it's not what conspiracists thought. One image was circulating of a spacewalk in which an astronaut could be seen to momentarily have 3 legs. Sure seems damning until you realize this was never released by NASA, but was rather taken from a Facebook page that acknowledges its use of AI to generate, quote, space fantasies, end quote. And then there's the most outrageous of claims. An image was widely shared that depicts the Artemis crew suspended in the air on wire harnesses in front of a green screen. It was a flashback to all the old claims about moon missions having been filmed on a soundstage using special effects. But again, the image wasn't from NASA, and when it was demonstrated to have been faked using AI, it became clear that the conspiracy theorists here were using AI to falsify their claims, not the other way around. As ridiculous as all of this misinformation was, even more ridiculous is the fact that it resulted in the resurgence of long-refuted conspiracy claims that other missions to the moon were faked as well. And I can't stand for that. This is Historical Blindness. I'm Nathaniel Lloyd, and it's high time I addressed the false claims that humankind never landed on the moon. Thank you for joining me for Moonstruck, Debunking Apollo Hoax Claims, Part 1, An Astronomical Amount of Evidence. Before we begin, I want to thank my newest patron, Melanie Stridham. Thanks to all my patrons. I love researching and writing this program. I'm proud of it, and I find it fulfilling. But it's still the financial support of you patrons, far more than the meager ad revenue I bring in, that makes it possible for me to devote as much time as I do to the podcast. Patrons of the show get access to an exclusive RSS feed with ad-free versions of the show, early release of episodes, teasers, and exclusive minisodes between every main release, making this a weekly podcast for patrons. If you hear minisodes and think they're little blurbs or insubstantial sound bites, think again. They're fully researched and produced episodes, anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes long, and they tie in with the main episode topics. And they even sometimes fill in the gaps and tell the rest of the story that my main episode didn't have time to tell. For example, after part 1 of my series on the myths of Nazi super technology, I dove deeper into the Chapeler device that was being claimed as technology capable of harnessing Vril, the Space Force, in 1930s Germany. And after part 2, I told the story of another purported real time machine, the Chronovisor. This one also supposedly developed by a former Nazi scientist, along with the Catholic Church. For listeners who are interested, I also sell these exclusive minisodes for just $3 a pop. So head over to patreon.com/historicalblindness and consider purchasing the occasional blind spot minisode that interests you, or supporting the podcast for as little as $1 a month. Now, let's continue the episode. Welcome to Historical Blindness. To many, and let's face it, probably to all my listeners, there's no question about the reality of the Apollo moon landing. I've sometimes been challenged by listeners who suggest I may be preaching only to the converted at this point when it comes to most of my political insights and my debunking of conspiracy theories. For example, what are the odds that any of you listeners who appreciate my podcast and are still listening 10 years in believed in the wilder Nazi moon base and German UFO myths before hearing me go on at length about how wrong they are? Please believe me that I realize how ridiculous it may be for me to give a reasoned and thought-out response to absurd claims about flying saucers and time-traveling schoolmistresses. But the way I look at it, which I think is the way many rational skeptics think about the value of offering reasoned refutations of wild or manifestly false claims, is that the value in putting together these responses isn't always to change the minds of my direct audience. It's often to put together a digestible and systematic refutation in order to arm my fellow skeptics with facts they can then wield when encountering in the wild those who actually believe these claims. And sometimes there is a clear need for one authoritative and easily accessed resource on the topic. With the internet and the podcast realm chock full of content that magnifies and spreads pseudoscience and historical negationism and all brands of fringe nonsense, avoiding such topics as gauche or beneath us would mean no one is talking about this stuff but those who claim it's true or real when it's not. When it comes to the claims that the Apollo program, NASA's human spaceflight program that landed people on the moon in the 1960s and early 70s, a project that many see as humankind's crowning scientific achievement and a testament to the willpower and bravery of humanity, was nothing but a well-funded and elaborate hoax. There are plenty of people broadcasting this falsehood. In 1999, a Gallup poll indicated that memory of the historic event was fading. 70% of Americans over 35 remembered watching the moon landing on television in 1969, but only half could name Neil Armstrong as the first man to walk on the moon, and only 5% knew the number of astronauts who had walked on the moon. Startlingly, at 6%, more of those surveyed believed the moon landing was fake. Still, at the time, this was considered a small percentage and was taken as evidence that the conspiracy claim was dwindling. However, more recent Gallup data cited in the news suggests 12% of Americans now believe the moon landing was faked. That means over the course of a quarter century, belief in this conspiracy falsehood has doubled. And you can see for yourself in almost any internet comment thread about Artemis II just how popular it remains to cast suspicion on the accomplishments of our space program. So I do think it's worthwhile now to address these long-standing conspiracy claims and try to answer all of them. The doubts about the moon landing started almost immediately, even before the manned missions to land on its surface. According to one researcher, claims of conspiracy and hoax were circulating as early as the Apollo 8 orbiting mission. But such early rumors may have originated from our rivals, specifically the USSR. Much of the political motivation for engaging in the space race can be traced to the Cold War, and indeed the US was playing catch-up to Soviet Russia with regard to our space program. The Russians had already had two major victories. The first successful launch of a satellite into low Earth orbit in Sputnik, followed by Yuri Gagarin's first successful crewed spaceflight. Indeed, one claim by conspiracists is that it is simply impossible that the US, who was behind the USSR in spaceflight technology, managed to pull ahead and land people on the moon when the Soviets were never able to do it. The truth is, however, that while Russia achieved several firsts, some of which were more stunts than real accomplishments, the US consistently achieved the same milestones within months or even weeks. And while the Soviet space program was grabbing headlines with these firsts, the US space program was quietly racking up far more actual space flights and more than twice as many hours in space. And we know why they didn't make it to the moon. They didn't have Wernher von Braun and the Saturn V rocket. They didn't develop a rocket capable of getting a crewed mission to the moon until the 1980s, when the space race had already been won. But interestingly, it's precisely because of this Cold War technology and propaganda race that we have such an astronomical amount of evidence that the Apollo program really did what we know it did. Certainly, the program also had scientific motivations, and those too require documentation and data for the purpose of empirical testing and the improvement of engineering applications. But considering that it was the project's potential for earning political capital that brought the funding it needed to succeed, we can view geopolitical strategy as its central purpose. And winning the space race required publicity and proof of their accomplishments. This is why we have so very much proof, and this in itself is a kind of proof. It may very well be that early rumors of fabrication were floated by the USSR, for they would have been extremely motivated to reveal it as a hoax. So the very fact that the Soviets never publicly asserted that it was a hoax and even corroborated our achievement, as will be seen, serves as strong evidence that we actually did what we showed the world we did. The first real rumblings of the conspiracy theory as we know it today did not show up until a year after the landing, when Bill Kaysing, a former employee of a rocket engine manufacturer, published a pamphlet in 1970 alleging that NASA had faked the landing to win the space race. The emergence and popularization of this conspiracy claim can be attributed in part to the rampant paranoia and valid distrust in the American government rising in those years. The televised conflict in Vietnam had given rise to a massive anti-war movement, and President Nixon had been caught lying and covering up his illegal secret bombing campaign and ground invasion in Cambodia. Around the same time as Kaysing published his pamphlet, the unrest culminated in the shooting of protesters at Kent State. In the ensuing years, as Kaysing worked on a book-length version of his claims, the release of the Pentagon Papers, the exposure of Watergate, the resignation of Nixon, and the shocking congressional investigations into MK-Ultra only worsened the atmosphere of distrust and the belief that the US government was capable of any sort of deception. Kaysing's self-published book, We Never Went to the Moon, America's $30 Billion Swindle, appeared in 1976, and from then onward, the claim that the Apollo program was a hoax has proven capable of surviving even the most irrefutable debunking. But Kaysing was never a credible whistleblower. The company he worked for, Rocketdyne, did build the engines used in all three main propulsion stages of the Saturn V, but Kaysing's claims had nothing to do with propulsion. In fact, he actually claimed they successfully launched and just hid in orbit for 8 days while fake images were televised, then descended, which would have made it quite the expensive hoax. Actually, Kaysing had no expertise in rocketry at all. He had worked for Rocketdyne as a technical writer, and he didn't even have expertise in technical writing. His claims depended on, quote, a hunch, an intuition, end quote, and relied on unnamed sources of dubious quality. For example, one source was an unnamed prostitute whom he claimed revealed to him that 2 astronaut clients confided in her that the 1969 moon landing was fake. Yet even this source fails him, as when he travels to speak with her, she tells him she actually knows nothing about astronauts. Kaysing says she afterward told police he was harassing her. Hilariously, he presents this like it's evidence of a deep cover-up, rather than evidence of him visiting cat houses and pestering sex workers with his conspiracy theories until they call the cops on him. It bears repeating that the first and most influential moon landing denier, Bill Kaysing, did not deny that the U.S. space program had succeeded in launching crewed spacecraft into low Earth orbit, or that the Apollo 11 mission really did launch. And this seems like something very often glossed over by deniers. No matter how the conspiracists might cast doubt on the film captured by astronauts of the journey in the module and of the landing and moonwalk, it can't be claimed that we didn't spend a great deal of money and successfully launch the crew into space, because thousands of media personnel and all 3 American broadcast networks filmed the launch from every angle and provided wall-to-wall coverage of the mission from then onward. There is no doubting the launch. That is why it is utterly strange that one eventual talking point among the moon landing deniers is that NASA just would not have risked the public humiliation of a possible failure by inviting the world to watch their extremely risky operation. According to this argument, there's just no way that such a project wouldn't have been undertaken in secret. This view betrays a fundamental historical blindness in that every milestone and accomplishment of the space race was made very public for its propaganda value, as stated above. And the idea that they wouldn't risk a moon landing, but they would risk a televised launch is rather stupid, since the launch is arguably the most dangerous part. As an example, we have Apollo 1, the first attempted crewed mission to the moon, which during a launch rehearsal suffered a cabin fire, resulting in the tragic deaths of all 3 crew members. It wasn't televised live, but it also wasn't secret, and afterward NASA was quite embarrassed by a congressional investigation into the incident. As a result, Apollos 2 through 6 were uncrewed missions, but just a year and a half later, they risked public humiliation for glory and began launching astronauts into space again. Perhaps the best example of NASA's willingness to risk and own up to disaster is the Space Shuttle Challenger disaster of 1986, which was televised live. Only 2.5 years later, they risked another crewed spaceflight on a mission they optimistically called, quote, return to flight, end quote. Now for a brief intermission.
This spring, Uber Eats has you covered. Whether you're celebrating mom, dad, or your favorite grad, not all of us are great planners, and with the Uber Eats gift hub, you don't have to be. Send flowers, perfume, champagne, or just their favorite meal straight to their door. Gifts arrive in as little as 25 minutes, and you can add a personalized video message for that additional so-not-last-minute touch. So this spring, get a leg up on gift giving with Uber Eats. Last-minute gifts that land every time. Must be 21 or older to purchase alcohol. Product availability varies per region. See app for details.
This episode is brought to you by Perfect Bistro Cat Food. Cats, this ad is for you. Has your human ever called you picky, persnickety, choosy? If so, Perfect Bistro Cat Food is for you. With ingredients like wild-caught tuna and pasture-raised lamb, tantalizing textures, and delectable flavors that meet even the most discerning cat standards. You're not picky, you're just perfectionists. Perfect Bistro, mealtime perfection for every cat. Have your human visit perfectbistro.com.
Where is Daredevil?
I'm right here. Don't miss the return of Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again.
So what's next?
I feel liberated.
I'm gonna take this city back.
Over medicated.
In an all-new season, now streaming only on Disney+.
They're hunting us. It's time we started hunting them.
I can work with that.
This should be tons of fun.
Marvel Television's Daredevil Born Again, now streaming only on Disney+.
Now, back to the show. While we're talking about other Apollo missions and other NASA efforts, it should be acknowledged that Apollo 11 was not the first nor the last mission to the moon. Casual moon landing deniers think wrongly about the moon landing as some aberration, like a weird Twilight Zone episode that exists in a vacuum and can be easily dismissed as smoke and mirrors. But those who fall deeper into this rabbit hole realize that to deny the Apollo 11 moon landing, you need to also deny many other missions, such that the hoax grows to insupportable proportions. Even if they're willing to grant, as Bill Kaysing did, that astronauts were launched into low Earth orbit, you would have to deny Apollo 8's successful mission to orbit the moon, and Apollo 10, the second mission to achieve lunar orbit. Moreover, by this logic, there would have been no reason at all for Apollo 9 and 10. Apollo 9 was launched to make sure they could achieve orbit with the lunar module they would eventually need to land on the moon. And Apollo 10 tested that they could make it to the moon and back with the lunar module. Why spend so much money to actually launch fake equipment into space? According to the deniers, that module would never actually be used. So this was just, what, commitment to the bit? And after Apollo 11 and the moon landing, there were the rest of the Apollo missions. Fall too deeply down this rabbit hole and you find you need to deny them all. Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17. We landed 12 Americans on the moon, landing 6 times over the course of only 3.5 years between 1969 and 1972. And it would have been 7 times had not Apollo 13 suffered a catastrophic oxygen tank explosion and been forced to abort. So moon landing deniers have to believe that this, the most expensive and elaborate hoax in history, was not only worth perpetrating once, but 5 more times, even though we'd already won the space race, and that just to make it seem real, we also faked dangerous failures. Talk about an unnecessary risk. Think about that. Moon landing deniers will say that NASA wouldn't risk public humiliation by trying to achieve a major human accomplishment, but they do think that they would risk the even worse public humiliation of being exposed for faking these missions. And remember, our rivals were watching us intently, hoping we would fail, and looking for any signs of chicanery. Russian corroboration of American achievements in spaceflight stands as some of the strongest independent evidence that the moon landings were not fake. The Soviet Union had a network of deep space communication facilities equipped with large enough antennas to track the Apollo flights, which of course they did, eager to keep abreast of their rivals' progress. And it's because they confirmed for themselves that the Apollo missions did indeed travel to the moon and back, that they have always given credit where credit was due. From 1970 onward, the largest Russian-language encyclopedia ranked the successful American landing on the moon as the 3rd greatest achievement in space exploration, after their own achievements in launching the first satellite and launching the first cosmonaut into space. At least one moon landing denier, Bart Sibrel, famous for having been punched by astronaut Buzz Aldrin, has tried to claim that Russians didn't have antennas capable of deep space tracking and could only track satellites in orbit until 1972, which is why, he claims, the Apollo program abruptly ceased at that time. But that, as you might imagine, is totally false. Soviets began developing their deep space tracking technology in 1959, and throughout the 60s, they used it to track their Venera probes, which they sent to Venus. American deep space tracking technology developed in parallel during the 60s. So this is a strange and contradictory claim to make. Moon landing deniers seem to suggest that America was both years behind Soviet technology but also years ahead of them? Which is it? The reality of why the Apollo program ended had nothing to do with Soviet technology, as money for the program dried up very quickly after the first moon landing in 1970, 2 years before the date Sibrel claimed Soviets suddenly developed the ability to track spacecraft. And this all came down to political will. President Nixon reportedly, quote, did not see the need to go to the moon 6 more times, end quote, and therefore slashed NASA's budget, so they were operating on dwindling funds for the remaining missions until 1972. This loss of interest in the space race is just further proof that Americans really did win it. It's sometimes questioned by deniers why the Soviet space program never reached the moon, as if this is proof it couldn't be done. But the more you know about the Soviet moon program, the more you understand that moon landing deniers are just ignorant. The Soviet program actually beat us to a successful lunar flyby in their Zond 5 probe, which carried animals to the moon and back. The Soviets were well on their way to their own lunar landing in their N1L3 program. In 1991, Vasily Mishin, a former Soviet engineer who worked on the program, spoke about why the program faltered. One reason was the death of its leader, visionary spacecraft designer Sergei Korolev in 1966. Another was the failure of their main rocket, the N-1, which exploded numerous times on test launches. But lastly, and most importantly for this topic, Mishin described how, much like in America, where we lost interest in further moon landings because we'd already beaten Russia there, Soviet leadership lost interest after seeing they'd already lost the race to the moon. Nor was Russia the only independent observer to corroborate NASA's accomplishments. Moon landing deniers act like NASA is lying to us and that if we mistrust NASA, there is no further evidence of the moon landing. But there is a great deal. Even children were able to confirm the truth of the Apollo flights. Throughout the 1960s, a group of British school children at Kettering Grammar School in Northamptonshire made headlines for managing to pick up signals from both Russian satellites and NASA space flights. Using even their basic radio equipment, they managed to monitor not only Apollo 11, but other moon missions as well, and calculate their orbital trajectories. And they weren't alone. A Kentucky man, Larry Basinger, managed to pick up transmissions broadcast from astronauts on the moon's surface to the lunar module. And independent confirmation was not only limited to radio transmissions. Amateur astronomers and observatories the world over observed and confirmed all the Apollo lunar flybys and landing missions. We're talking observatories all over the US, run by universities and entirely independent of NASA, as well as observatories in Germany, France, England, and Italy. Sky and Telescope magazine even regularly published lists of the optical sightings of these spacecraft. Not only that, but optical evidence of Tranquility Base, the historic lunar landing site where Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin became the first people to walk on the moon's surface, has since been captured. In 2009, the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter captured images of everything: the lunar module descent stages, the scientific instruments used to conduct experiments on the surface, the tracks of the lunar roving vehicle, and even our astronauts' footprints. Later images even captured the shadows of the American flags left behind by the Apollo astronauts. Knowing that, coming from NASA, these images would be subject to suspicion by moon landing deniers, the imagery was given to independent academic organizations, some of them in other countries, for analysis and interpretation. And in fact, images of Tranquility Base have even been captured by foreign space programs that would have no reason to cover for NASA. Japan's Selene lunar probe, India's Chandrayaan probes 1 and 2, China's Chang'e 2 probe, and most recently, South Korea's Danuri probe, all imaged Apollo landing sites. Clearly, there is a wealth of evidence, but still there is even more in the form of what Apollo crew members left behind and what they brought back with them. Among the scientific purposes of the Apollo missions was the placement of retroreflectors for lunar laser ranging, the practice of measuring the distance between the Earth and the Moon based on the time it takes for a laser pulse to be reflected back to Earth. Retroreflectors were placed on the surface of the Moon not only by Apollo 11, 14, and 15, but also by both Soviet and Indian robotic lunar rovers. These retroreflectors are routinely used by several observatories that have nothing to do with NASA. Deniers may claim the retroreflectors used are only those left behind by unmanned probes, but their location aligns with landing sites that, again, have been photographed and stand as proof of astronauts' presence on the moon's surface. Also, the retroreflectors left behind by Apollo 11 astronauts were used in 1969, and the first uncrewed lander carrying retroreflectors, Russia's Lunokhod 1, only reached the moon at the end of 1970. But maybe that's not concrete enough for moon landing deniers. So then there is the evidence they brought back. Apollo 12, the second mission that landed astronauts on the moon, actually came back with pieces of the Surveyor 3 lunar lander. The Surveyor program had sent 7 landers to the surface of the moon between 1966 and 1968. When Apollo 12 crew members brought Surveyor 3's camera back, it was studied to determine what long-term effect lunar conditions might have had on it, which doesn't seem like something anyone would bother doing if it wasn't really on the moon. It was discovered that a strep microbe had survived inside the camera, resulting in a great deal of scientific research into the survival of bacteria in space and the potential of interplanetary contamination, which again doesn't seem like something anyone would bother with if it wasn't real. And lastly, over the course of all 6 Apollo moon landings, more than 800 pounds of lunar rock have been brought back to Earth for study. The moon rocks have been the subject of countless experiments by NASA scientists as well as research scientists who have nothing at all to do with the space agency. Some have been dated hundreds of millions of years older than any known rock on Earth. They have been compared with rock brought back to Earth by Russian probes, as well as with lunar meteorites. They are confirmed to have come from the moon. But does this astronomical amount of rock-hard evidence sway moon landing conspiracists? No, of course not. They'll say that's just what they want you to think. To a die-hard denialist, evidence that debunks their irrationally clung-to beliefs is just proof that the conspirators are working hard to cover up the truth. Clearly, the weight of all evidence here becomes irrefutable. In Part 2, we'll address point by point the supposed evidence of the deniers. But the massive amount of evidence that this well-known event did occur should be enough to quieten any conspiracist, such that belief in the Apollo hoax claims should have shrunk over the last 25 years rather than doubled. Deniers may weakly claim that it's suspicious that there even is so much evidence. But where's the logic in that? Should we believe only things with less evidence? And as is often the case with such conspiracy claims, the crucial flaw in all of it is that since so very many people know the moon landing happened and were even instrumental in making it happen, deniers must argue that all of them are in on this plot. I've spoken about this logical flaw with massive conspiracy claims countless times. In fact, this principle, the notion that, quote, too many minions spoiled the plot, end quote, was mathematically proven 10 years ago by physicist, science communicator, and fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, Dr. David Robert Grimes. His study, published in PLOS One, determined what the odds are that such a massive plot would be exposed and how long it might take. His study was extremely generous to conspiracist thought. For example, he only considered the odds that such conspiracies would be exposed from within, through incompetence or whistleblowing, and didn't even factor in the possibility of exposure by, say, a plucky investigative journalist, or, as is relevant in our topic, a motivated foreign adversary. He determined the odds of a best-case scenario for conspirators by looking at a variety of real conspiracies that were eventually exposed. PRISM, the NSA domestic surveillance program exposed by Edward Snowden. The Tuskegee syphilis study, exposed by epidemiologist Peter Buxton. And the FBI forensic lab misconduct scandal, brought to light by FBI chemist Frederick Whitehurst. Taking into account the number of conspirators and the time before exposure in all these cases, and overestimating in favor of the conspirators, Grimes's study estimated a 4 in 1 million chance of accidental or deliberate exposure from among those with insider knowledge of such a plot. Pretty low, right? Except when the conspiracy is massive. Grimes then estimated how many plotters would need to be involved in a variety of common conspiracy claims. For the danger of unsafe vaccines to be covered up, more than 700,000 people would be implicated. And for pharmaceutical companies to be suppressing the cure for cancer, as some conspiracists claim, it would be a comparable number of plotters. For climate change to be a hoax, we'd be looking at more than 400,000 people in the conspiracy. And as others have pointed out, for the moon landings to have been faked, something like 411,000 people would have to be in on it. Let's crunch those numbers. Based on the generous odds Grimes established, with a number of conspirators over 400,000, the moon landing hoax would have been credibly exposed more than once. Deniers gonna deny, though, and will deny Grimes's reasoning, saying they have exposed this plot. But Grimes is referring to the, quote, average expected number of fatal leaks, end quote, meaning undeniable exposure, which has never been provided for this conspiracy theory because it cannot be. And the reality is even worse for deniers. The likelihood that such a plot would have been exposed twice may seem low. But keep in mind the time parameters. According to Grimes's formula, with hundreds of thousands of conspirators, it would have been exposed twice within about 11 days. That means that such a conspiracy would have been exposed countless times over the last 50 years. And keep in mind also how generous our number of 411,000 plotters is. It's based solely on employees of the Apollo program. But as we've seen, conspiracist claims would require everyone in the Soviet space program to be complicit as well, along with every astronomer at every observatory that confirmed the space flights, and every amateur radio operator who intercepted the astronauts' transmissions from the moon. By Grimes's calculations, for a plot to remain secret even for 5 years, the number of people involved could only be 2,500. And for the secret to be kept a decade, only 1,000. This inverse proportionality means that for the moon landing to have been a hoax and never convincingly exposed for 50 years, less than 300 people would have to have perpetrated it, which would have been impossible. Conspiracist thought is like a virus or a disease. It may never be entirely eradicated, but if nothing is done to counter its spread, if it's left to fester, its transmission grows exponentially. Therefore, we must counter it however we can. NASA recognized this truth about Bill Kaysing's denial of the moon landing right away, regardless of how ridiculous his claims were. Keep in mind, Kaysing's claims expanded the number of conspirators to even more absurd proportions, claiming without any convincing evidence that the Apollo 11 astronauts were actually hiding out at a Nevada strip club during the landing, and that afterward they all needed psychotherapy to live with the guilt of their lies. Remember, this was in the mid-70s, when everyone remembered the Apollo program vividly, and the most recent moon landing was only a few years earlier. Nevertheless, NASA recognized that you shouldn't just let people spread such lies without rebuttal, no matter how irrational or preposterous they might be. So in 1977, they issued a fact sheet that bluntly refuted some of Kaysing's claims. It was titled, "Did U.S. Astronauts Really Land on the Moon?" And its first sentence was, "Yes, astronauts did land on the moon." This early debunking focused heavily on the openness of their program, independent corroboration of their accomplishments, and the irrefutable existence of lunar material that astronauts brought home. And it also answered one by one some of Kaysing's supposed proofs. Despite this strong early response, though, the conspiracy theory would only continue to grow, especially when flat earthers took up Kaysing's cause in the 80s. And with the advent of the internet, it has spread even faster than it can be stamped out. Next time, I'll follow NASA's lead and address each of the denialists' quote-unquote proofs, one by one. Thanks for listening to Historical Blindness. As always, special thanks go out to my partner patrons: Diane Lane, Joe Escott, Devlin Hoff, Lisa, Prickly Pear, Fred R. Grotice, Robin Naggett, Don Mundus, Eunice Allen Bradley, Juliette O'Connor, Jonathan Williams, Joshua Luddington, Christine LeBlanc, Lonnie C., Kaylee, Ama, Christopher L. Burton, Benny Slater, Chris BDG, Jocelyn Clausen, Lindsay McAllister, Brian, Jamie Nielsen, Martin Robistow, Josh Haberman, and AJ. Thanks for all your support, patrons. I'm looking forward to a productive summer, and I hope to not only catch up on patron fulfillment, but also to overhaul the blog, get the last year of transcripts posted somewhere, start posting to social media again, and who knows, I may even start a second podcast. I have some ideas. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows, like The Constant and Who Did What Now. Some music on this episode was licensed through a Blue Dot Sessions blanket license at the time of the episode's publication. Additional music is by Kai Engel and by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution license. Check out the show notes for a list of the tracks used. You can support the show by pledging on Patreon or by making a one-time donation on PayPal. Find those links in the show notes, or find me on Venmo at Historical Blindness. Until next time, consider this. According to the psychological analysis of conspiracist thought, a big part of why people believe these false claims is that it gives them a sense of superiority and a feeling of belonging to an in-group. So in a weird way, it's about perceptions of being cool. As the REM song says, quote, "If you believe they put a man on the moon, if you believe there's nothing up his sleeve, then nothing is cool," end quote. But it used to be considered really cool that American astronauts, those with the quote-unquote right stuff, accomplished a landing on the moon. Kids wanted to be them when they grew up. And in opposition to this resurgence of conspiracism, Artemis II also showed us a broad general interest and pride in the American space program. I'm hopeful that further Artemis missions will make spaceflight cool again and show how pathetic and lame conspiracy theory and denialism really are.